for this any longer.
You must calm down and listen to reason.
Reason? After everything you've done?
Quiet! You don't even dare you mess with the wrong person.
The silver serving tray crashed against the marble floor, sending china fragments scattering across the grand foyer like broken promises. Mrs. Adaeze Okafor, at 72 years old and with 40 years of domestic service behind her, had never dropped anything in her entire career. But today, her hands had frozen mid-air when she heard the words coming from the billionaire's fiancée standing 3 feet away. "You're nothing but an old, useless woman who should have retired years ago. Why Chief Amadi keeps you around is beyond me. The moment we're married, you'll be the first one I throw out of this house." Victoria Nwosu, 20 years younger than her billionaire fiancé, stood in the center of the foyer wearing a designer dress that cost more than Adeeze's annual salary. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed at the elderly housekeeper with the same casual cruelty she might show a stray dog. Her Louis Vuitton handbag dangled from her other arm, a symbol of the wealth she hadn't earned but felt entitled to command. But Adaeze didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply looked at this young woman with eyes that had seen Nigeria before independence, that had witnessed civil war, that had buried 3 of her own children and still found reasons to smile each morning. Her weathered hands, which had cooked thousands of meals, cleaned countless rooms, and cared for 2 generations of the Amadi family, remained steady despite the insult. "Miss Victoria," Adaeze said quietly, her Igbo accent thick with dignity, "I have served this family since before you were born. I will leave when Chief Amadi himself asks me to leave, not one moment before." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's face flushed red with rage, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the ugliness beneath. Around them, other household staff had stopped working, frozen in various positions like actors in a paused film. The young housemaid held her duster mid-air. The gardener stood visible through the window, pruning shears forgotten. Even the security guard at the gate had turned to watch. They all knew what was coming. Victoria always destroyed someone when challenged. Always. Let us make the comments section an interactive one. Tell us where you are watching from. Give us a thumbs up. Turn on your notification bell to get our next interesting story. Please subscribe to our channel. In the 6 months since she'd entered Chief Amadi's life, she had fired 7 staff members for minor infractions. She had reduced the head cook to tears at least a dozen times. She had threatened the driver's job so many times he now drove with trembling hands. The household had become a battlefield where everyone walked on eggshells, waiting for Victoria's next explosion. But before Victoria could respond, a voice neither of them expected cut through the tension. "Perhaps," the voice said calmly from the doorway, "we should all take a moment to remember our manners." Everyone turned. Standing in the entrance to the main parlor was a woman none of the regular staff had seen before. She appeared to be in her late 50s, dressed simply in a traditional wrapper and blouse of deep indigo with gold embroidery. She carried a small traveling bag made of locally woven fabric, and her head was covered with a modest scarf. Her face held the kind of beauty that comes only with age, weathered but graceful, lined but warm, with eyes that seemed to see through pretense to truth. "Who are you?" Victoria demanded, her anger finding a new target. She stepped closer, trying to use her height and designer clothes to intimidate this stranger. The woman set down her bag carefully, with deliberate slowness that suggested she would not be rushed or pressured by anyone. "My name is Mama Chidinma Okonkwo. I'm the new house manager Chief Amadi hired. I arrived from Enugu this morning." Adeeze's eyes widened in surprise and relief. Chief had mentioned hiring someone new to help manage the estate as he prepared for his upcoming wedding, but no one expected someone so ordinary, so unimpressive by Lego standards. No designer clothes, no expensive jewelry, no attempt to project wealth or status. Just a village woman with quiet dignity. Victoria laughed, a sharp sound without humor that echoed through the marble foyer. "House manager? You look like you just came from the farm. What could you possibly manage? Can you even read and write properly?" The insult was designed to humiliate, to establish Victoria's superiority. Several staff members winced, anticipating the newcomer's shame and retreat. But Mama Chidinma didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she smiled gently, the kind of smile a grandmother gives a child throwing a tantrum. "I have managed 12 children through school and university, 16 grandchildren who all call me for advice, a village women's cooperative with 200 members, a church choir, a farming collective, and my late husband's difficult mother for 40 years without ever raising my voice in anger. I think I can manage a household, Miss Victoria." Something in her tone made Victoria pause. It wasn't defensive or aggressive. It wasn't boastful or confrontational. It was simply certain, like a river that knows its course and won't be diverted by stones thrown into its path. Like a tree that has weathered many storms and knows its roots go deep. "We'll see about that," Victoria muttered, her confidence slightly shaken. She turned sharply on her expensive Christian Louboutin heels and stormed up the grand staircase, her phone already out to call Chief Amadi and complain about this inappropriate hiring decision. Adaeze bent slowly to pick up the broken china, her old knees protesting each movement. The arthritis that came with 7 decades of life made every stoop painful. Mama Chidinma knelt beside her without hesitation, helping gather the pieces despite her travel-stained wrapper, despite having just arrived, despite technically being the manager who shouldn't be doing such work. "Leave it, Ma," Adaeze protested, embarrassed. "You just arrived. You shouldn't dirty your clothes. Let me call the junior staff. We are both servants in this house," Mama Chidinma said quietly, placing sharp fragments carefully in her palm. "Neither of us is too important to clean up broken things. And sometimes," she added thoughtfully, "broken things teach us important lessons about what needs mending." As they worked together, Adaeze studied this newcomer carefully. There was something different about her, something solid and unshakable that the household had been missing. In the 6 months since Victoria had entered Chief Amadi's life, the household had become a place of fear and tension. Staff members were fired for minor mistakes, a slightly overcooked meal, a flower arrangement Victoria disliked, a greeting she deemed insufficiently respectful. Suppliers were screamed at and blacklisted over trivial issues. Even visitors were treated with thinly veiled contempt if they didn't meet Victoria's standards of wealth and status. The transformation had been gradual but devastating. Chief Amadi's estate, once known throughout Lagos as a place of warmth and hospitality, had become cold and unwelcoming. The laughter that once filled the kitchen had disappeared. The easy camaraderie among staff had been replaced by suspicious silence. Everyone was constantly looking over their shoulders, waiting for Victoria's next outburst. Chief Amadi seemed blind to it all, or perhaps willfully ignorant. At 68, recently widowed after losing his beloved first wife Ngozi to cancer 2 years earlier, he had been lonely and vulnerable when Victoria targeted him at a business conference in Abuja. She was beautiful, educated, well-connected in social circles. She knew exactly what to say, how to listen, when to laugh at his stories. She made him feel young again, vital, desired. His adult children were concerned but reluctant to interfere in their father's happiness after watching him grieve so deeply for their mother. "How long has she been like this?" Mama Chidinma asked softly as they deposited the broken china in a dustbin near the kitchen entrance. Adaeze hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. Loyalty to Chief Amadi warred with the truth that desperately needed telling. Finally, she whispered, "Since the beginning, Ma. Since the very first day she entered this house. But only when Chief is not watching. When he's here, she becomes a different person entirely." Mama Chidinma nodded slowly, unsurprised. She had seen this pattern before in her village. People who wore masks of respectability in public but showed their true faces to those they considered beneath them. I see. And does anyone tell him the truth? Who would dare? Adaeze shook her head sadly. We all need our jobs. Many of us have families depending on these salaries. Children in university, aging parents, siblings who need help. And besides, he loves her. Or thinks he does. He's happy for the first time since Mama Ngozi died. Who are we to interfere in our employer's happiness with our complaints? Sometimes, Mama Chidinma said thoughtfully, gazing out the window at the well-maintained gardens. Those who serve a family longest serve them best by telling them the hardest truths. Silence in the face of wrong becomes complicity. Before Adaeze could respond to this wisdom, Chief Amadi himself descended the grand staircase with measured steps. At 68, he was still imposing, tall at over 6 feet, distinguished with his silvered hair worn slightly long. His bearing that of a man accustomed to respect and deference. He wore traditional agbada in cream-colored fabric with intricate embroidery, looking every inch the successful Igbo businessman he was. Behind him, Victoria clung to his arm possessively, her face now arranged in concerned compassion, the anger of moments before completely hidden. Mama Chidinma, Chief Amadi said warmly, extending his large hand in welcome. Welcome to our home. I apologize profusely for not being here when you arrived. I was on a conference call with our partners in South Africa that ran longer than expected. Mama Chidinma shook his hand respectfully with both of hers in the traditional manner. Chief, thank you for this opportunity. My village elders spoke highly of your family. Your late wife's cousin Grace is my neighbor, and she told me stories of your household's kindness. Victoria's voice cut in, sweet as poisoned honey dripping with false concern. Darling, I was just explaining to Mama Chidinma that we might need someone with more modern experience. No offense to you, Ma, but managing a Lagos estate is quite different from village life. We have standards here, technologies, expectations. Perhaps someone with hotel management experience would be better suited. Chief Amadi frowned slightly, his thick eyebrows drawing together. Victoria, Mama Chidinma comes with the highest recommendations. My late wife's family has known her for decades. Her organizational skills are legendary in Enugu. She managed the entire catering operation for Senator Okafor's daughter's wedding. 2,000 guests without a single complaint. Let's give her a fair chance to prove herself. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened to chips of ice. Her fingers tightened slightly on Chief's arm. Of course, darling. Whatever you think is best. You know I only want what's good for our household. She emphasized the word, our, possessively. She kissed his cheek with theatrical affection and excused herself, claiming she needed to review flower arrangements for the upcoming wedding. But as she passed Mama Chidinma, moving close enough that the scent of her expensive French perfume was overwhelming, she whispered just loud enough for the older woman to hear, "You won't last a week. I'll make sure of it." Mama Chidinma's expression didn't change. She simply watched Victoria glide away, then turned to Chief Amadi. Chief, may I see the staff quarters and meet everyone formally? I believe in knowing the people I'll be working with. That evening, as Mama Chidinma settled into her small but comfortable room near the servants' quarters, a space with a single bed, a wooden wardrobe, a small desk, and a window overlooking the garden, Adaeze brought her tea and jollof rice with fried plantains. You should know some things, Ma, Adaeze said carefully, setting the tray down and sitting in the room's only chair at Mama Chidinma's insistence. Miss Victoria is planning the wedding for next month. Everything is arranged, the church, the reception hall, the caterers, the musicians. Chief's children are not happy about the speed of it all, but they say nothing. They don't want to seem like they're trying to control their father's life. She paused, gathering courage. His daughter Ifioma tried to talk to him once, about 3 months ago. She mentioned that the staff seemed unhappy, that Victoria's demands were excessive. Chief became angry. He accused Ifeoma of being jealous, of not wanting him to find happiness again, of trying to keep him lonely and mourning forever. The argument was terrible. They didn't speak for 2 weeks. Mama Chidinma sipped her tea thoughtfully, savoring the familiar taste. Tell me about Chief's first wife. Help me understand what this household used to be. Adeeze's face softened immediately, years falling away as she remembered. Mama Ngozi. She was everything good in this world, Ma. Kind without being weak, generous without being foolish, wise without being harsh. She knew every staff member's name, their children's names, their birthdays. When my son was sick with typhoid, she personally drove me to the hospital and paid all the bills. When the gardener's daughter got admission to university but couldn't afford fees, Mama Ngozi created a scholarship in her own name to cover it. Her eyes filled with tears. She treated all of us like family. She would come into the kitchen and cook alongside us, laughing and singing. She taught the younger maids how to read and write in the evenings. She insisted that everyone eat proper meals, not leftovers. When she died 2 years ago, this whole house mourned for months. Even the flowers in the garden seemed to droop. Chief was completely lost without her. He stopped eating properly, stopped going out, just sat in his study looking at her photographs. And then Victoria appeared? Mama Chidinma prompted gently. 6 months ago, at a hotel business conference in Abuja where Chief was speaking about real estate investment. She approached him afterward, asked intelligent questions about his business, complimented his vision. They exchanged numbers. She began calling him, inviting him to art exhibitions, charity galas, business dinners. Suddenly he was smiling again, going out, dressing up, living. His children were grateful at first. They wanted their father happy, wanted to see him engaged with life again. Adeeze's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But then Victoria started visiting the house, and they saw who she really was. The way she spoke to staff when Chief wasn't looking. The way she criticized everything Mama Ngozi had done, the decor, the routines, the staff choices. She started making changes, firing people, bringing in her own people. But Chief saw none of it. Because around him, she transforms? Mama Chidinma finished. Completely. When Chief is present, she's perfect. Sweet, caring, respectful to everyone. She even pretends to honor Mama Ngozi's memory, saying things like, "As your dear late wife would have wanted," when she suggests changes. She visits charity organizations with Chief and takes photographs for social media. She attends his business dinners and charms his associates. But the moment he leaves for his office, Adeeze shuddered. Over the next week, Mama Chidinma quietly observed the household dynamics with the patience of someone who understands that truth reveals itself to those willing to watch and wait. What she saw troubled her deeply but didn't surprise her. Victoria had a pattern, a methodology to her cruelty. She would wait until Chief Amadi left for his office around 8 a.m., then begin her reign of terror systematically. On Monday, she summoned the cook and berated her for 20 excruciating minutes because the pepper soup served at dinner the previous night was too spicy for refined palates. The cook, a woman in her 50s who had trained at culinary school and worked for the family for 15 years, stood with tears streaming down her face while Victoria listed her inadequacies. On Tuesday, she threw a glass of water at the gardener because he had trimmed the roses wrong. Though what was wrong about them no one could determine, as they looked beautiful and healthy. The elderly gardener, who had maintained the estate's award-winning gardens for 20 years, quietly wiped the water from his face and returned to work without a word, knowing protest would cost him his livelihood. On Wednesday, she made the young housemaid kneel on the hard marble floor and apologized repeatedly for accidentally brushing against Victoria's designer handbag with a duster. The girl knelt for over an hour, her knees aching, tears of humiliation streaming down her young face, while Victoria sat nearby filing her nails and making phone calls, occasionally glancing over to ensure the punishment continued. But whenever Chief returned home, Victoria transformed into a gracious, loving fiancée with Oscar-worthy performance skills. She would praise the staff's work effusively, compliment the delicious meals, ask after their families by name, even give them small gifts, chocolates, small amounts of money, pretty trinkets. She would link her arm through Chief's and tell him how blessed they were to have such wonderful, hard-working people caring for them. Chief saw only this version, the carefully constructed performance that bore no resemblance to reality. He would smile proudly, feeling his choice of partner was validated, believing Victoria had the same kind heart his late wife Ngozi had possessed. His children saw more, intuited more, but felt increasingly helpless. His son Chike, at 42 and successfully running the family's construction business, tried raising concerns gently during a Sunday family lunch in the second month of Victoria's presence. "Papa, are you certain about this wedding? You barely know her. You've only been together 6 months. Why rush into marriage? Why not wait another year? Make sure you're truly compatible." But Chief Amadi had grown defensive, his voice rising. "I am 68 years old, my son. How much time do I have left to wait? Should I spend my remaining years alone? Victoria makes me happy. She makes me feel alive again. Why can't you children be happy for me? Why must you question my judgment?" His daughter Ifeoma, at 39 and a respected university lecturer in sociology, was more direct during a private conversation in his study. "Papa, please listen to me. The staff say Victoria treats them badly. I've heard specific complaints, verbal abuse, unreasonable demands, threats of dismissal for minor issues. This isn't just gossip. These are serious concerns about her character." Chief Amadi's face had flushed with anger. "The staff gossip and exaggerate. Victoria has high standards, yes. There's nothing wrong with expecting excellence. Your mother had high standards too. You're just jealous that I'm moving on, that I'm not staying frozen in grief. You want me to be miserable forever as some kind of tribute to your mother's memory." The accusation had been so unfair, so hurtful, that Ifeoma had left in tears. The rift between father and daughter had taken weeks to heal, and even then, the subject of Victoria remained forbidden territory. Mama Chidinma said nothing during family dinners when she was occasionally asked to join. Nothing during the tense moments when Victoria's mask slipped slightly in front of others. But she listened carefully to every conversation, observed every interaction, noted every inconsistency. And importantly, she began documenting everything in a small leather-bound notebook she kept in her wrapper pocket. Old age and village wisdom had taught her that truth needs evidence, not just testimony. Words could be denied, twisted, dismissed as jealousy or gossip, but documentation, dates, times, specific incidents, witnesses was harder to refute. So she wrote everything down in her careful, precise handwriting. Monday, November 6th, 9:15 a.m. Victoria threw glass of water at gardener Mr. Ease. Witnesses: myself, housekeeper Adaeze, housemaid Chioma. Reason given: roses trimmed incorrectly, though roses appear healthy and beautifully shaped. The breaking point came exactly 2 weeks after Mama Chidinma's arrival. Chief Amadi was hosting an important dinner party, a celebration for his 68th birthday. 50 guests were expected, including prominent business people, government officials, family friends, and society figures. It was to be a showcase event, demonstrating Chief's successful emergence from grief, his new happiness, his plans for the future with Victoria. The invitations had been sent weeks earlier on expensive embossed cardstock. The menu had been planned meticulously. Victoria had taken complete charge of the planning, ordering the staff around like a military general preparing for war, her demands becoming more hysterical and unreasonable as the date approached. She had fired the original florist after 3 consultations because the flower arrangements weren't sophisticated enough. She had rejected 2 different caterers before settling on an expensive Lagos company known for serving government functions. She had insisted on replacing all the household's regular china with rented designer pieces. She had even tried to fire the family's longtime driver because his uniform wasn't stylish enough, though Chief had quietly overruled that decision. On the evening of the party, as guests began arriving in their expensive cars and elaborate traditional attire, disaster struck in the kitchen at 6:47 p.m. The catering company that Victoria had hired, at a cost of over 3 million naira, called to cancel at the last minute. The owner, a prominent Lagos businesswoman, explained coolly over the phone that she had just learned who she would be serving. It turned out she was someone Victoria had publicly humiliated at a charity event a month earlier, loudly criticizing her outfit and calling her nouveau riche with no class in front of dozens of witnesses. This was her revenge. Perfectly timed, maximally embarrassing, and completely legal since she was canceling within the contract's narrow window. Victoria flew into a rage unlike anything the staff had witnessed before. She screamed, threw her phone across the kitchen, shattering its screen, swept dishes off counters, called the absent caterer names so vulgar that several staff members visibly flinched. How dare they? How dare they embarrass me like this? On the most important night? I'll sue them. I'll destroy their business. I'll make sure they never work in Lagos again. Adaeze, in the kitchen trying to coordinate the crisis, spoke up carefully, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Ma, we have food prepared. The staff and I can serve what we made. We always prepare backup dishes just in case. It won't be the fancy 5-course meal you planned, but it will be good Nigerian food. Jollof rice, egusi soup, pounded yam, assorted meats. Your village cooking? Victoria spat the words like poison. Your local common nonsense? We have government ministers arriving, ambassadors, CEOs. We need sophistication, elegance, refinement. Not your crude local dishes that taste like poverty. The insult hung in the air. Several staff members gasped. The elderly cook, who had trained in culinary school and won awards for her cooking, looked as if she'd been physically struck. Perhaps? Mama Chidinma's calm voice cut through the chaos like a cool breeze through smoke. We should stop worrying about sophistication and focus on hospitality. In my experience, guests remember warmth and welcome far longer than they remember which fork they used. Victoria whirled on her, eyes wild with rage and desperation. Nobody asked for your village philosophy. In fact, this is probably your fault. You probably sabotaged this deliberately, contacted that caterer and poisoned her against me. You've been trying to make me look bad since you arrived. The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that several staff members gasped audibly. Mama Chidinma had been in Lagos only 2 weeks. She had no connections to Lagos catering companies. She barely left the estate. How could she possibly have orchestrated anything? But Victoria was beyond reason, beyond logic, drowning in her own panic and fury. You're fired, Victoria screamed, pointing at Mama Chidinma with a shaking finger. Get out. Pack your things and get out of this house right now. And anyone who supports her, anyone who defends her, you're all fired too. Every single one of you. Adaeze looked at Mama Chidinma, then at the other trembling staff members. They all faced the same calculation. Stay silent and keep their jobs, or stand up for what's right and risk everything. For 6 months they had endured abuse in silence, telling themselves it was the price of employment. But something about Victoria's attack on Mama Chidinma, this village woman who had shown them only kindness and respect, finally broke the dam of their fear. Adaeze stepped forward and stood beside Mama Chidinma, her old body straightening to its full height, years of submission falling away. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Then you'll have to fire all of us, Miss Victoria, because we all support Mama Chidinma, and we all know the truth about who you really are." Victoria's hand flew up to slap Adaeze across the face, all pretense of civility abandoned in her rage. But before the blow could land, Mama Chidinma caught Victoria's wrist midair. Not roughly or violently, but with the gentle firmness of someone stopping a child from touching a hot stove. "Miss Victoria," Mama Chidinma said quietly, her voice carrying absolute authority despite its soft tone. "You should not raise your hand to someone old enough to be your mother. That is not behavior befitting anyone, regardless of status or anger." "Let go of me," Victoria shrieked, struggling to free her wrist, her face contorted with rage and humiliation. "How dare you touch me? Do you know who I am? I'm going to be the mistress of this house." The commotion had grown loud enough to draw attention from the parlor where early arriving guests were being served drinks and appetizers. Curious faces began appearing at the kitchen doorway. Socialites in expensive aso-ebi, businessmen in Agbada, government officials with their security details. They stared at the scene in shocked fascination. Victoria shrieking and struggling, an elderly village woman calmly holding her wrist, staff members standing in defensive formation. Chief Amadi pushed through the gathering crowd, his face confused and concerned. He had been greeting guests near the entrance when he heard the screaming. "What is happening here? Victoria? Mama Chidinma?" Victoria immediately burst into theatrical tears, yanking her hand free from Mama Chidinma's grip. She ran to Chief Amadi and threw herself against his chest, sobbing dramatically. "Amadi, these people are ganging up on me. The caterers canceled to sabotage us. I think this new manager arranged it somehow, and I'm trying to save your party, trying to make everything perfect for you, and they're all turning against me. They grabbed me. They threatened me. I'm scared." But before Chief could respond, before he could comfort Victoria and reprimand the staff as he had done so many times before, another voice spoke. One that made everyone in the kitchen freeze. "Father, perhaps you should hear the full story before you make judgments." His daughter Ifeoma stood in the kitchen doorway, her university professor's dignity wrapped around her like armor. Behind her stood her brother Chaik and two of the household staff, all holding their phones in raised hands like evidence at a trial. "We've been recording," Ifeoma said quietly, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "For weeks now. We tried to tell you, Papa, but you wouldn't listen. You accused us of jealousy, of trying to control your life. So we decided we needed proof. We gathered evidence." Chief Amadi's face went pale, the color draining until he looked suddenly older than his 68 years. "Recording what?" Ifeoma stepped forward into the crowded kitchen, her phone screen glowing. The guests in the doorway pressed closer, drawn by drama they sensed was more compelling than any party entertainment. She pressed play, and Victoria's voice filled the kitchen, clear and venomous, stripped of all pretense. "You're nothing but an old, useless woman who should have retired years ago. Why Chief Amadi keeps you around is beyond me. The moment we're married, you'll be the first one I throw out of this house." The recording continued, a devastating compilation of weeks of abuse. Victoria's voice screaming at the cook, "Your food tastes like poverty, like village nonsense. You're worthless." Victoria threatening the driver, "I should fire you just for having the audacity to look me in the eye." Victoria mocking the gardener, "You're too old and stupid to understand proper landscaping." Insult after insult, threat after threat. Every cruel word Victoria had spoken to the staff over 6 months, captured and preserved by staff members who had finally found the courage to document their abuse. The kitchen was silent except for Victoria's recorded voice, revealing her true character to the dozens of witnesses now crowding the doorway. The guests in the doorway gasped and murmured, their shocked whispers building to a wave of judgment. Several prominent women, friends of Chief's late wife Ngozi, looked horrified and disgusted. One elderly woman, a respected community leader, shook her head and made a sound of deep disapproval. The social damage was instantaneous and irreparable. By morning, everyone in Lagos society would know what had been revealed in Chief Amadi's kitchen. Chief Amadi stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, dawning realization, and finally, profound heartbreak. His hands shook. His breathing became labored. He looked at Victoria, this woman he had planned to marry, this woman he had defended to his children, this woman he had thought would help him heal from grief, and saw a stranger wearing a mask that had finally slipped completely off. Victoria, he whispered, his voice breaking. Is this true? Tell me this is somehow false? Edited, taken out of context. Victoria's tears had stopped. Her sobbing had ceased. Her face had gone cold and calculating as she recognized that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. She stepped back from Chief, wiping her eyes, her mind visibly working through her options. They're lying. They doctored those recordings. Technology can fake anything now. They hate me because I have standards, because I refuse to tolerate mediocrity, because I'm not soft like your perfect saint of a wife was. The mention of Ngozi was a mistake. Chief's face hardened. But before he could speak, Adaeze stepped forward, her voice steady and clear despite her age and fear. Chief, I have served your family for 40 years. I served your late wife Mama Ngozi with pride and love. I bathed your children when they were babies. I cooked your mother's meals during her final illness. I would never ever lie to you. Everything on those recordings is true. Every word. She has terrorized us for 6 months. And we endured it in silence because we need our jobs and didn't want to disturb your happiness. Other staff members nodded, tears streaming down their faces. One by one, they stepped forward to speak, sharing their experiences in front of the assembled witnesses. The young housemaid, her voice trembling. She made me kneel on the marble floor for an hour because I smiled at you when you came home. Chief, she said I was trying to seduce you, that I was being inappropriately familiar. I was just being respectful. I'm 23 years old. You're like a grandfather to me. The cook, her professional pride finally unleashed. She threw food in my face 3 weeks ago because she didn't like the seasoning of the ofada stew. Food I had spent 6 hours preparing. She called me worthless, said I cook like an illiterate villager, even though I trained at culinary school and have worked in restaurants and hotels. The driver, his dignity restored by truth-telling. She made me wait outside in the rain for 3 hours because she forgot to tell me she didn't need the car that evening. I stood in a thunderstorm, got soaked through, caught a terrible cold. She laughed when I sneezed the next day and said maybe it would teach me not to question her schedule. The gardener. She threw water at me, screamed at me, told me I was too old and should be in a village somewhere waiting to die, not touching her beautiful garden. Chief Amadi listened to each testimony, his face growing older and more pained with every word. This was the woman he'd planned to marry in 3 weeks. The woman he'd given a key to his home, authority over his staff, access to his life. The woman he'd defended against his own children's concerns. The woman he'd thought carried even a shadow of his late wife's grace and kindness. Finally, he turned to Mama Chidinma, this village woman who had been in his household for only 2 weeks. And you, Mama Chidinma? What have you witnessed? Mama Chidinma reached into her wrapper pocket and pulled out her small leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. Chief, I have documented everything I've witnessed in the past 2 weeks. 14 specific incidents of verbal abuse. 3 incidents of physical intimidation. Multiple threats of dismissal. And 1 attempted assault. Tonight, just moments ago, when she tried to strike Sister Adaeze in front of all these witnesses. She handed him the notebook with both hands in a gesture of respect. His hands shook as he took it, as he read her detailed, dated, witnessed accounts. Each entry was clear, factual, impossible to dismiss as exaggeration or gossip. Victoria saw her carefully constructed world collapsing like a sandcastle before a wave. Amadi, please. You know me. You know I love you. These people are trying to separate us because they're jealous of what we have. They can't stand to see you happy. They want to keep you mourning your wife forever. But Chief Amadi closed the notebook slowly, carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. When he looked at Victoria, his eyes held a disappointment deeper than anger, a sadness more profound than rage. I buried my beloved wife Ngozi 2 years ago, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. She was kind to everyone, rich or poor, educated or simple, powerful or powerless. She treated our staff like family. She taught our children to value every human being, regardless of position or wealth. She believed that how we treat those who serve us reveals our true character. His voice broke. I thought I saw some of her qualities in you, Victoria. I was lonely and foolish and desperate to escape my grief. I saw what I wanted to see instead of what was really there. Amadi, please. The engagement is over, he said firmly, his voice gaining strength. I want you to leave my house tonight. I will have your belongings sent to you tomorrow. Victoria's mask finally shattered completely, revealing the rage and entitlement beneath. You'll regret this. I'll sue you for breach of promise. I'll tell everyone you led me on, wasted my time, damaged my reputation. I'll take everything you have. I'll destroy you. Chief Amadi looked at her sadly, seeing clearly for the first time. Then do what you must, but do it from somewhere else. You're no longer welcome in my home. As security guards gently but firmly escorted a screaming, threatening Victoria from the estate, Chief Amadi stood in his kitchen, surrounded by his loyal staff, his children, and dozens of party guests who had witnessed everything. He looked every year of his 68 and more. The party was ruined. His plans were destroyed. But somehow, underneath the embarrassment and sadness, he felt the first stirrings of something like relief. Mama Chidinma approached him gently, her voice soft with compassion. Chief, your guests are still here. The party was planned. We have food prepared, good Nigerian food, made with love by your staff. Shall we welcome them properly? He looked at her, this wise village woman who had documented truth when everyone else remained silent, who had protected his household, who had saved him from a terrible mistake. Feed them, he said simply. Use whatever food we have. I don't care about sophistication or impressions tonight. Tonight, I care about honesty and the people who showed me truth when I desperately needed it. What followed was perhaps the most memorable and meaningful birthday party Chief Amadi would ever experience. Instead of the catered 5-star meal Victoria had planned with its French names and tiny portions, the staff served generous portions of traditional Nigerian dishes they had lovingly prepared as backup. Fragrant jollof rice cooked with tomatoes and spices, rich egusi soup thick with melon seeds and vegetables, perfectly pounded yam smooth as silk, spicy suya with grilled meats, golden akara fried to crispy perfection, steamed moi moi wrapped in leaves. And instead of the formal, stiff speeches and entertainment Victoria had arranged, the evening became an unexpected celebration of authenticity and truth. Guests gathered in the large parlor and spilling out onto the veranda, many having heard the confrontation, and Chief Amadi did something he never did in public. He spoke with complete candor and vulnerability. My friends, he began, his voice steady despite his emotional exhaustion. I am 68 years old today, old enough to know better, old enough to be wise. But apparently, I can still be fooled by a pretty face and sweet words. I almost married a woman tonight who would have brought misery to everyone in my household. I was saved by the courage of people I took for granted. My loyal staff who risked their livelihoods to speak truth. My children who loved me enough to gather evidence when I wouldn't listen to words. And a wise woman from the village who documented everything and waited for the right moment to reveal it all. He gestured toward Mama Chidinma, who stood modestly near the doorway trying to avoid attention. This woman has been in my house for only 2 weeks. In that time, she has shown more wisdom, integrity, and courage than I have shown in 6 months of courtship with someone who was playing a role. She reminded me of something I had forgotten in my grief and loneliness. The room was completely silent, dozens of influential Lagosians hanging on every word. My late wife Ngozi tried to teach me this lesson our entire marriage, but I don't think I truly understood it until tonight. She used to say that character reveals itself in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. The staff who serve us, the workers who support us, the people society tells us are beneath us. Victoria was charming to wealthy guests, respectful to powerful associates, gracious to anyone who could advance her social position. But to people she saw as beneath her, our staff, our drivers, our cooks, our gardeners, she showed her true self, and I was too blind or too stubborn to see it. The elderly community leader who had shaken her head earlier spoke up, her voice carrying authority. Chief Amadi, you are not the first and won't be the last to be deceived by someone skilled at deception. What matters is that you accepted truth when it was presented, even though it was painful and embarrassing. That takes courage and humility. Your late wife Ngozi would be proud of you tonight. Several guests murmured agreement. The atmosphere shifted from gossip-hungry fascination to something more compassionate. They had come expecting a party. Instead, they had witnessed a powerful lesson about character, truth, and the courage to admit mistakes. The party continued late into the night, transformed from Victoria's carefully planned showcase into something far more meaningful. Authentic connection, honest conversation, good food shared with genuine hospitality. Staff members were invited to join, breaking down the usual rigid barriers between servers and served. Stories were shared. Laughter emerged from the earlier tension. The kitchen staff received compliments on their excellent cooking that made several of them cry with relief and pride. Late that night, after the last guest had departed and the estate had finally grown quiet, Chief Amadi sat on his veranda with Mama Chidinma, Adaeze, and his 2 children. The Lagos night wrapped around them, humid and alive with distant sounds of traffic and night birds. I have learned something profound tonight, Chief said quietly, staring out at his darkened gardens. Something my late wife Ngozi tried to teach me our entire marriage, but I don't think I truly understood until I almost made a catastrophic mistake. What lesson, Papa? His son Chike asked gently. Chief Amadi took a deep breath. That character reveals itself most clearly in how we treat those who can do nothing for us, who have no power over us, who we could hurt without consequence. Victoria showed me exactly who she was from the beginning, but she showed my staff, not me. I dismissed their discomfort as gossip. I explained away their concerns as exaggeration. I chose to believe the performance she gave me instead of the truth she showed others. That was my failure. Mama Chidinma nodded slowly, her weathered face peaceful in the dim light. My mother used to tell me, if you want to know who someone really is, watch how they treat those who serve them. A person who is kind only to those who can benefit them is not kind, they're strategic. Your mother was wise, Chief said. As are you. Mama Chidinma, I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. You could have stayed silent. You could have just done your job, collected your salary, ignored the abuse around you. Instead, you documented truth systematically and protected my family from a terrible mistake. Why? You barely know us. Mama Chidinma smiled gently. Chief, in my village, we have a saying, the elder who sees a child eating poison and stays silent is not an elder but an accomplice. I could not watch you make this mistake and say nothing. Yes, I needed this job. Yes, speaking up risked everything. But some things matter more than security. Truth matters. Justice matters. Protecting good people from cruelty matters. Adaeze spoke up, her voice emotional after hours of stress. I have worked in this house for 40 years, Chief. Under your wife Mama Ngozi. This was a home full of love, laughter, and respect. We were treated as valued members of a large family. When Miss Victoria came, it became a place of fear and constant tension. Tonight, you gave us back our dignity and showed us that we matter. That is a gift beyond price. Chief Amadi shook his head, humbled. I should be thanking all of you. You endured months of abuse rather than abandon your positions or betray my trust in you by gossiping about my fiancée to others outside the household. That is loyalty I don't deserve but will never forget. And you, my children, he turned to Ifeoma and Chike. You loved me enough to risk my anger, to gather evidence, to tell me hard truths. I'm sorry I didn't listen earlier. I'm sorry I accused you of jealousy when you were trying to protect me. Ifeoma crossed the veranda and knelt beside her father's chair, taking his hands in hers. Papa, we only wanted to protect you. We saw you so happy for the first time since Mama died, and we didn't want to destroy that happiness. But we also couldn't stand by and watch you marry someone who would have made your life miserable. We love you too much for that. The conversation continued long into the night, healing beginning in honest words, relationships being restored through vulnerability and truth. They talked about Ngozi's wisdom, about recognizing red flags earlier, about balancing grief and moving forward, about the difference between loneliness and being ready for new love. The next morning, Victoria's belongings were collected by professional movers and sent to her apartment. She made good on her threat to sue for breach of promise and emotional damages, but her case fell apart quickly and publicly when the recorded evidence was presented to lawyers and, inevitably, leaked to social media. No court would support her claims when her own voice documented such extensive, systematic abuse of household staff. Word spread through Lagos society with the speed and thoroughness that only really devastating gossip can achieve. Within 48 hours, everyone in their social circles knew what had been revealed at Chief Amadi's birthday party. The woman who had positioned herself as a sophisticated socialite, who had carefully cultivated an image of elegance and class, was revealed as someone who treated service workers with contempt and cruelty. In a Nigerian culture that deeply values respect for elders and kindness to those in lower positions, her behavior was considered profoundly shameful, worse than stealing, worse than lying, because it violated fundamental values about human dignity. Victoria's carefully constructed social position collapsed overnight. Invitations were withdrawn. Business partnerships dissolved. Her social media accounts, once filled with aspirational content, became targets for harsh criticism. Former friends distanced themselves publicly. The Lagos socialite world, which can be remarkably forgiving of many flaws, drew a hard line at the kind of cruelty that had been documented. Meanwhile, Chief Amadi began the process of rebuilding his household on entirely different foundations. He called a staff meeting 3 days after the disastrous party and made several announcements that left many of them in tears. First, he said, I am increasing everyone's salaries by 40%, effective immediately. This is not charity. This is recognition that I have underpaid you for your loyalty, expertise, and tolerance of an intolerable situation that I should have prevented. Second, I am renovating the staff quarters. You will have better housing, private bathrooms, air conditioning, and proper furniture. Again, this is not generosity. It is overdue justice. Third, I am establishing a new household policy. Any staff member can request a private meeting with me to raise concerns, questions, or suggestions. No questions asked, no fear of reprisal. I should have created this years ago. My wife Ngozi would have insisted on it. Fourth, I am personally apologizing to each of you for my blindness, my stubborn refusal to listen, and my failure to protect you from abuse in your own workplace. You deserved better from me. The staff members stood in shocked, grateful silence. Several were crying. The young housemaid who had been forced to kneel finally spoke, her voice trembling. Chief, we never blamed you. We only blamed ourselves for not being strong enough to speak up earlier. The staff members stood in shocked, grateful silence. Several were crying. The young housemaid who had been forced to kneel finally spoke, her voice trembling. Chief, we never blamed you. We only blamed ourselves for not being strong enough to speak up earlier. Chief Amadi shook his head firmly. The failure was mine. A good leader creates an environment where truth can be spoken without fear. I failed to do that. But with your help, we will rebuild this household into what it should have been all along. He also asked Mama Chidinma to expand her role beyond just house management. I need someone who will tell me truth, not what I want to hear. Someone who will document problems and bring them to my attention before they become crises. Will you be that person, Mama Chidinma? Mama Chidinma smiled, her weathered face peaceful. Chief, at my age, that's the only kind of person I know how to be. I cannot pretend. I cannot perform. I can only speak truth with respect. Over the following months, the household transformed in ways both visible and profound. Staff members who had worked in constant fear now worked with joy and pride. Laughter returned to the kitchen where the cook and her assistants prepared meals while singing traditional songs. The gardens bloomed more beautifully than ever, tended by a gardener who was no longer terrorized but appreciated. The young housemaid smiled freely, no longer afraid that her natural cheerfulness would be punished as inappropriate. Chief Amadi's children noticed the dramatic change in their father as well. He seemed more settled, more thoughtful, more like the man he had been when their mother was alive. He spoke often about the lessons he had learned, processing his near mistake with unusual openness. I was trying to replace your mother, he admitted to Ifeoma during an afternoon visit 4 months after Victoria's departure. They sat in his study, surrounded by photographs of Ngozi at various stages of life. I thought finding another woman would fill the hole she left, would make the grief stop. But Ngozi wasn't replaceable. She was unique, irreplaceable. And what I really needed wasn't a replacement. It was to remember the values she taught me and live them more fully, more consciously. Ifeoma squeezed her father's hand. Mama would be proud of how you handled this, Papa. Not the initial blindness. She'd probably scold you for that. They both laughed. But the courage to admit your mistake publicly, to compensate your staff, to rebuild with humility, that takes real strength. 6 months after Victoria's departure, Chief Amadi called a major family meeting. His children, his grandchildren, and key household staff including Mama Chidinma and Adaeze gathered in the large parlor, curious and slightly nervous about this formal summons. Chief Amadi stood before them, leaning slightly on a walking stick he'd recently started using after a minor knee surgery. I have made several important decisions about my estate and my legacy. I wanted to share them with all of you together. He paused, looking around at faces he loved and valued. First, I am revising my will substantially. My children will still inherit the businesses and properties as planned. But in addition, I am creating a foundation in your mother's name, the Ngozi Amadi Foundation for Domestic Workers' Rights and Dignity. The staff members present gasped. Adeeze's hand flew to her mouth. Mama Chidinma's eyes widened in surprise. Chief continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. The foundation's purpose will be to support domestic workers throughout Lagos and eventually across Nigeria. It will provide legal protection for those facing abuse, educational scholarships for their children, healthcare benefits, retirement planning, and most importantly, a voice for those who have historically been voiceless in our society. He pulled out formal documents. I am endowing this foundation with 20% of my total estate, approximately 2.4 billion naira. This will allow it to operate sustainably for decades, helping thousands of families. Several people were crying openly now. The cook buried her face in her hands. The elderly gardener wiped tears from his weathered cheeks. Furthermore, Chief said, turning to face Mama Chidinma directly, I am asking Mama Chidinma Okonkwo to serve as the Foundation's first executive director, with a salary commensurate with such responsibility. Mama Chidinma, who rarely showed strong emotion, looked genuinely stunned. Chief, I'm just a village woman. I know nothing about running a foundation, managing that kind of money, dealing with lawyers and government bureaucracy. Chief Amadi smiled gently. You know about justice. You know about protecting the vulnerable. You know about standing up for truth even when it's difficult and dangerous. You know about documentation, about evidence, about patience and wisdom. Those are the only qualifications this foundation needs. The lawyers and accountants and administrators, we can hire those. But the moral compass, the vision, the integrity, that comes from you. He approached her and placed both hands on her shoulders in a gesture of deep respect. You saved my family from a terrible mistake. You documented truth when everyone else stayed silent out of fear. You showed courage that inspired others to be brave. Now I'm asking you to take that same courage and use it to help thousands of other families avoid what we experienced. Will you do this? Mama Chidinma looked at Adaeze, who nodded encouragingly through her tears. She looked at Chief's children, who were smiling with genuine warmth. She looked at the other staff members, whose faces showed hope and pride. Finally, she looked back at Chief Amadi and spoke with quiet dignity. Chief, if you trust me with this responsibility, I will give it everything I have for as long as God gives me strength. But I have one condition. Name it, Chief said immediately. Sister Adaeze must be the assistant director. She has 40 years of experience in household management. She knows the challenges domestic workers face, and she has the respect of everyone. I cannot do this without her wisdom beside me. Adaeze gasped. Ma, I'm 72 years old. I was planning to retire next year. Mama Chidinma smiled. And what were you planning to do in retirement? Sit and wait for death? Sister, you have decades of knowledge that could help thousands of people. Why waste it? Chief Amadi laughed. A genuine, joyful sound that his children hadn't heard in years. Then it settled. Mama Chidinma will be executive director, and Sister Adaeze will be assistant director. Both with full salaries, benefits, and my complete support. What had started as a near disaster, a wealthy, lonely widower almost marrying a cruel opportunist, had transformed into something with the potential to change thousands of lives. The foundation that emerged from Chief Amadi's painful lesson would go on to help domestic workers across Nigeria who faced similar abuse in silence, who had no recourse, no protection, no voice. The formal launch of the Ngozi Amadi Foundation for Domestic Workers' Rights took place on the first anniversary of Chief Amadi's disastrous birthday party. The symbolism was intentional, marking not just the crisis that revealed truth, but the transformation that followed. Over 300 people attended the launch event at a prestigious Lagos Hotel Conference Center. The guest list was deliberately diverse: wealthy philanthropists and domestic workers, government officials and village representatives, business leaders and labor organizers, society figures and ordinary families. This mixing of social classes was itself a statement about the foundation's values. The room was decorated simply but beautifully, with large photographs of domestic workers from across Nigeria. Gardeners, cooks, nannies, housekeepers, drivers, each portrait showing dignity and humanity. Beside each photograph was a brief story of their contributions to the families they served. The visual message was clear. These are not invisible people, but individuals with names, stories, and worth. Victoria Nwosu was conspicuously absent. She had left Lagos entirely after her social reputation collapsed, relocating to Abuja where fewer people knew her story. Occasionally, news filtered back. She had tried to restart her social climbing in the capital, but the recordings of her voice had spread too widely. The internet never forgets, and her cruelty had been documented too thoroughly. Last anyone heard, she had moved to London, hoping to reinvent herself where her past wouldn't follow. As Chief Amadi stood to deliver the opening address, he looked around at the assembled faces reflecting Nigeria's full diversity. Wealthy and poor, educated and simple, young and old, all gathered in mutual respect for a common cause. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Exactly 1 year ago today, I celebrated my 68th birthday with a party that became a crisis. I was exposed as a fool. A wealthy, educated man who had been completely deceived by someone skilled at wearing masks." He paused, letting his vulnerability show. "My late wife Ngozi believed deeply that every person has inherent dignity, that no one's value is determined by their job title, bank account, family name, or social status, that we are all connected in our shared humanity. She lived these values every single day, treating our household staff with the same respect she showed to government ministers and business partners." His voice grew thick with emotion. "For too long after she died, I forgot those lessons. I was lost in grief, desperate for companionship, vulnerable to manipulation. I almost married a woman who represented everything opposite to Ngozi's values. Someone who measured people's worth by their usefulness to her, who treated those she saw as beneath her with casual cruelty." He gestured toward Mama Chidinma, elegant in her traditional wrapper despite the formal hotel setting. "This woman came from her village with nothing but wisdom, courage, and a commitment to truth. She saved me from a catastrophic mistake. But more importantly, she reminded me what my wife spent 40 years trying to teach me, that true wealth isn't measured in money or property or social status, but in how we treat each other, especially those who have less power than we do." The room was completely silent, hundreds of people hanging on every word. "The foundation we launched today is my attempt to honor Ngozi's legacy in a practical, powerful way. It will provide legal protection for domestic workers facing abuse. It will offer educational scholarships so their children can break cycles of poverty. It will ensure healthcare access and retirement security. But most importantly, it will give voice and dignity to people who have been systematically silenced and devalued by our society." He pulled out a document and held it up. "I have committed 20% of my estate, 2.4 billion naira, to endow this foundation permanently. But money alone won't change anything. What changes things is people. People like Mama Chidinma who have the courage to document truth. People like my household staff who found the strength to speak up. People like my children who loved me enough to confront me with hard evidence when I wouldn't listen to words." The audience erupted in sustained applause. Several prominent Lagos philanthropists stood, starting a standing ovation that spread through the room until even the government officials and business executives were on their feet. When the applause finally subsided, Mama Chidinma stood to speak. She approached the microphone with visible nervousness. This village woman now addressing hundreds of Nigeria's elite, but her voice was steady when she began. "I am not comfortable with speeches," she admitted, drawing warm laughter. "In my village, we show wisdom through actions, not words. But today I will make an exception because this foundation represents something bigger than any of us." She looked out at the domestic workers scattered throughout the audience. Women and men who had been given special invitations, front row seats, equal dignity with the wealthy attendees. "I see many of you here who work in households like I do. You cook meals that feed families. You maintain homes that shelter children. You drive cars that transport important people. You garden spaces that bring beauty into the world. Your work is valuable. Your contributions matter. You deserve protection, respect, and dignity. Her voice grew stronger. But our society has not always treated you this way. Too many of you face abuse in silence because you fear losing your income. Too many of you endure insults, threats, even violence because you have no power and no recourse. Too many of your children cannot attend good schools because domestic work pays too little and offers no security. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room. This foundation exists to change that reality. We will provide legal support when you face unjust treatment. We will fight for fair wages and proper contracts. We will ensure your children have access to education. We will advocate for labor laws that protect you. And we will work to change the cultural attitudes that treat domestic workers as less valuable than other people. Another wave of applause, this time led by the domestic workers themselves, who had never before been addressed so directly at such a formal event. Mama Chidinma concluded simply, Chief Amadi created this foundation in his late wife's name, but it belongs to all of us, everyone who believes that how we treat the most vulnerable among us reveals who we truly are as a society. Together, we will build something that lasts, something that changes lives, something that honors every person's dignity. The launch event was followed by the formal opening of the Foundation's first office, a modest but well-equipped space in accessible Lagos neighborhood. The staff included lawyers specializing in labor rights, social workers trained in crisis intervention, educators focused on scholarship administration, and healthcare coordinators. But the heart of the operation was Mama Chidinma and Adaeze, who brought decades of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. Within its first year, the foundation helped 847 domestic workers across Lagos. They provided legal representation for 23 workers facing unjust dismissal. They intervened in 67 cases of wage theft. They documented and reported 19 cases of physical abuse to authorities. They awarded educational scholarships to 134 children of domestic workers. They provided emergency medical assistance to 43 workers who had no healthcare access. But beyond the numbers, the foundation changed something more fundamental. It challenged the cultural assumption that domestic workers were invisible, voiceless, and powerless. By documenting abuses, advocating publicly, and leveraging Chief Amadi's social influence, they slowly began shifting attitudes among Lagos's elite families. Some wealthy families resisted, viewing the foundation as interference in private household matters. But others, especially those who remembered Ngozi Amadi's grace and kindness, embraced the changes, improving wages, formalizing contracts, treating their staff with greater respect. The foundation also began holding quarterly workshops for both domestic workers and their employers, creating unprecedented dialogue between these two groups. Workers learned about their legal rights, professional standards, and communication skills. Employers learned about fair management practices, cultural sensitivity, and the practical and moral case for treating staff well. Chief Amadi attended every workshop, often sharing his own story as a cautionary tale. I was so blinded by my own loneliness that I ignored what was happening in my own household. He would tell audiences candidly. I dismissed my staff's suffering as gossip. I accused my own children of jealousy when they tried to warn me. My pride and grief made me a terrible employer and a foolish man. Don't make my mistakes. His willingness to be vulnerable, to admit failure publicly, to learn from those he employed rather than just direct them. This itself was revolutionary in a culture that often emphasized hierarchy and saving face. 2 years after the foundation's launch, Chief Amadi gathered his family again, this time for a different kind of announcement. He looked older now, at 70, moving slower, his health declining gradually but noticeably. But his spirit seemed lighter than it had in years. I have been thinking about legacy, he told his children and grandchildren in his study. Not just what I leave behind in money or property, but what I leave behind in values and changed lives. He pulled out a thick binder. This is the Foundation's first 2-year report. Read it. Look at the stories of families helped, children educated, abuses prevented, attitudes changed. This is what your mother always wanted, practical love that transforms systems, not just individual charity. His youngest granddaughter, now 10 years old, had been reading through the report with wide eyes. Grandpa, this lady here, Sister Adaeze, she gave cookies to thousands of children? Chief Amadi laughed. Not exactly, sweetheart. But the foundation she helps lead gave scholarships to thousands of children so they can go to school. That's even better than cookies. The girl thought about this seriously. When I grow up, can I work for the foundation too? Chief Amadi's eyes filled with tears. My dear, that would make me, and your grandmother in heaven, very, very proud. Mama Chidinma continued directing the foundation for 5 more years before age required her to retire at 73. By then, it had expanded to 6 Nigerian cities, helped over 11,000 domestic workers, awarded scholarships to over 3,000 children, successfully lobbied for stronger labor protections, and fundamentally changed the conversation about domestic workers' rights in Nigeria. On her last day as director, Mama Chidinma stood in the foundation office surrounded by staff, beneficiaries, and supporters. Chief Amadi, now 75 and using a wheelchair after a stroke, was wheeled to the front to honor her. You changed everything, he said simply, his speech slightly slurred but his meaning clear. You came to my house as a simple village woman. You left as someone who transformed thousands of lives. Thank you. Mama Chidinma smiled, her face now even more weathered, but still radiating quiet strength. Chief, you did the hard part. You listened to truth even when it was painful and embarrassing. You changed even when it cost you pride and money. You chose justice over comfort. That's what created all this. She gestured around the crowded office. I just documented what I saw. These people... She indicated the foundation staff and beneficiaries. They did the real work of changing lives, challenging injustice, giving voice to the voiceless. Chief Amadi lived to see his 92nd birthday, long enough to watch his grandchildren graduate from university, to see the foundation expand nationwide, and to know that his late wife's legacy of compassion lived on in practical, powerful ways that would continue long after he was gone. Adaeze, the elderly housekeeper who had served the family for over 45 years by the time she finally retired, was given a full retirement package and a small cottage on the estate grounds. She lived there comfortably, visited daily by family members who had finally learned to value her properly. Not as a servant, but as an elder, a teacher, a living link to Ngozi's wisdom. In her final years, Adaeze became something of a legend among Lagos domestic workers, the woman who had stood up to a billionaire's cruel fiancé and sparked a movement. Young women would visit her, asking for advice about handling difficult employers, navigating household politics, maintaining dignity in service. Her standard advice never changed. Document everything. Speak truth respectfully but firmly. Remember, your worth is not determined by your employer's opinion, and never accept abuse as the price of employment. Chief Amadi passed away peacefully at 92, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and several longtime staff members, including the now ancient gardener and cook. His funeral was one of the largest Lagos had seen in years. Thousands attended, from government officials to domestic workers, all united in honoring a man who had learned hard lessons and used them to change lives. At the funeral, Ifeoma delivered a eulogy that captured her father's transformation. My father made a terrible mistake. He almost married someone cruel. But when confronted with truth, he didn't defend his ego or protect his pride. He admitted error, compensated those he'd failed to protect, and created something beautiful from his shame. That's the legacy I want to remember. Not the mistake, but the response to it. The Ngozi Amadi Foundation continued long after Chief Amadi's death, sustained by its endowment and growing support from other wealthy Nigerians who were inspired by the story. Within 20 years, it had helped over 100,000 domestic workers, fundamentally changed labor laws regarding household employment, and shifted cultural attitudes across Nigeria about the dignity and rights of domestic workers. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Mama Chidinma had understood from the beginning. The measure of a society is how it treats those who serve it. Character reveals itself in how we treat those who have less power than we do. And it's never too late to choose justice over convenience, truth over comfort, dignity over exploitation. The lesson spread quietly through Nigerian society, changing one household at a time, one employer at a time, one generation at a time. Real wealth is not measured in what we own, but in the legacy of kindness, justice, and dignity we leave behind. Victoria's name faded from memory, remembered only as a cautionary tale in workshops about identifying and confronting household abuse. But Mama Chidinma's name, Adaeze's courage, Chief Amadi's transformation, and Ngozi's original vision, these became part of Lagos folklore, stories told to teach each new generation about the power of truth, the importance of protecting the vulnerable, and the possibility of redemption even after terrible mistakes. The Foundation's motto, displayed prominently in every office, captured everything in 7 simple words. Every person serves. Every person deserves dignity. Share with us what you have learned from this story. Share to your friends and loved ones. Please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for your support always. The end.